Lila had never felt so nervous in her life as she walked toward her cousin's house that afternoon. The sun was warm and golden, spilling light across the streets in a way that made everything feel softer. Yet her heart was pounding as if it knew something was about to happen that would change everything. And she couldn't shake the feeling that today was different from any other day she had ever spent there. She had come to visit casually, expecting an ordinary afternoon with family, maybe a quiet chat or a cup of tea, but ever since she had heard that Ethan, her cousin's older friend, would be around, her thoughts had been in turmoil. She had always admired him from a distance, the way he laughed quietly, almost to himself, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about something he loved, the gentle way he treated everyone around him, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she had hoped for a moment, a chance, where they could really see each other, not just in passing, but in a way that mattered. As she walked down the familiar hallway, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished wooden floor, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. Her hand hesitated at the doorknob of the guest room. She could see the door was slightly open, a crack that revealed just a sliver of the interior, and she realized she could either knock and make her presence known or quietly retreat and let the moment pass. But before she could decide, she felt an almost magnetic pull, a sensation that told her she needed to see, to know, to witness something real, something human, something that went beyond the polite, controlled interactions she usually had with people she admired from afar. And when she finally peeked inside, she froze in a way that made her whole body still, as if time itself had paused. There was Ethan, lying on the bed, not in any inappropriate way, but resting in a manner that made him look more fragile and vulnerable than she had ever noticed, a side of him that few people ever saw, and it struck something deep inside her, a strange fluttering, a rush of emotions she hadn't prepared for, a mixture of concern, fascination, and something that almost felt like longing. Her mind raced, imagining all the reasons she should turn away, step back, apologize for intruding, but she couldn't move. Her feet felt glued to the floor, her breath caught in her chest, and her eyes couldn't stop taking in the simple details. The way his hair fell softly across his forehead, the quiet way he exhaled as if the weight of the day was pressing down on him, the faint line of a smile that lingered as he shifted slightly in his sleep, unaware of her presence. She realized that this moment, unplanned and completely unscripted, had a weight to it, a meaning she didn't yet understand, a quiet intensity that made her heart ache with a strange mixture of awe and fear. And then, almost as if the universe had timed it perfectly to heighten her emotions, a sudden sound came from the hallway, a creak in the floorboards, a faint rustle that announced someone else's approach, and Ethan's head lifted, his eyes opening slowly, meeting hers with a look that was soft, surprised, and somehow filled with recognition. Even though they had barely spoken before, it was a gaze that seemed to see not just the outside, but the quiet storm of feelings inside her, the nervous energy, the heart that beat faster than it had any right to, and she felt a heat rise to her cheeks, a blush she couldn't hide, a trembling that wasn't just from the fear of being caught, but from the strange, unexpected intimacy of being witnessed in that quiet, shared space. She stepped back instinctively, unsure whether she had crossed a line, unsure whether she had made a mistake, but something in the way Ethan's eyes softened, in the way his lips curved into a gentle, almost shy smile, told her that maybe, just maybe, this was a beginning, a moment where ordinary interactions ended, and something entirely new, entirely fragile, entirely real, was about to begin. Her heart raced faster as she tried to gather her thoughts, telling herself to act normal, to speak, to do something that wouldn't embarrass her, yet words failed her, stumbled awkwardly on her tongue, and she realized that for once, she didn't want to speak. She wanted to feel, to observe, to hold on to the fleeting glimpse of someone she admired in their quiet, unguarded self. She thought about how many times she had imagined conversations with him, moments where they might laugh together, moments where she might finally tell him something she had kept hidden for months, and now, standing at the edge of this room, watching him, she realized that imagination had never captured the reality, the way his presence filled the space with calm, the subtle shift in the air when he looked at her, the warmth that seemed to radiate even without a word being spoken. Time seemed to stretch, each second heavy with potential, as she debated whether to knock, whether to retreat, whether to say something, anything, that would make this ordinary afternoon unforgettable, and yet before she could make a decision, Ethan shifted slightly, lifting his hand as if to brush back a stray lock of hair, and in that simple, human gesture, she saw not just a friend, not just a figure she admired, but a person, someone complex, someone alive, someone with vulnerabilities and strengths that made her heart ache in ways she hadn't anticipated. She thought about the risk of her emotions, the danger of misreading the situation, the possibility of embarrassment, yet every cautionary thought was drowned out by the tidal wave of feeling that surged through her, a mixture of excitement, longing, and a strange, gentle fear that made her pulse pound in her ears. And then, in the quiet that followed, a sudden thought struck her. What if this was a sign, a rare, fleeting alignment where moments of vulnerability and honesty could exist without judgment, where she could finally connect with someone she had admired silently for so long, and where a simple glance or a quiet word could open doors that had seemed locked forever? She stood frozen, torn between action and inaction, knowing that the next moment could define everything, could alter the way she saw Ethan, the way she understood herself, and the way this afternoon might be remembered for years to come. And just as she thought she might summon the courage to step fully into the room, to speak, to acknowledge the electricity between them, a soft sound from the hallway, perhaps a footstep, perhaps a door creaking, interrupted the fragile bubble of intimacy, and both of them froze, eyes meeting, hearts racing, the tension between nervousness and anticipation almost unbearable, leaving them suspended in a moment that felt timeless, a moment charged with possibility, with unspoken words, with emotions that were messy, raw, and real. And as Lila took a cautious breath, trying to steady herself, she realized that she had entered this house expecting nothing more than a casual visit, but now, with the golden light streaming in, with Ethan's gaze on her, with the quiet hum of life surrounding them, she had stumbled into a story she didn't yet understand, a story that would pull her in, challenge her, and change her in ways she could not yet imagine, and the knowledge of that, combined with the soft vulnerability in his eyes, left her both exhilarated and terrified, knowing that whatever happened next could be the beginning of something she had longed for without fully knowing it. And as the room held its breath, as the world seemed to shrink to the space between them, Lila realized that she had already crossed a threshold she could never return from, and all that was left was to see what would unfold. Ethan's gentle smile lingered in Lila's mind long after the initial shock of seeing him had passed, and she could feel a strange mixture of relief and nervousness as she finally stepped fully into the room, closing the small gap of the door behind her, feeling the quiet warmth of the space surround her as though it had been waiting for her presence all along, and yet her heart still pounded, a rhythmic drumbeat of excitement and uncertainty that refused to be silenced. She could see Ethan sitting on the edge of the bed now, not alarmed, not tense, but calm, almost contemplative, and the way he held himself with quiet poise made Lila realize that there was a depth to him she had only glimpsed before, a subtle complexity that made her feel both drawn to him and slightly fearful of how much she wanted to know, to understand, to connect with the part of him that seemed to exist just for moments like this, moments of quiet honesty and intimacy that could not be faked or forced. And as she took a careful step closer, she noticed the faint lines around his eyes, the way his fingers tapped lightly against the sheets as if he were thinking through words he hadn't spoken yet, and she felt a sudden rush of empathy, a desire to be the one who offered comfort, who could listen without judgment, who could understand the layers beneath the exterior he showed the world, a side she had been drawn to secretly for months without realizing how deeply it had affected her. And now, standing there, she understood that this was her chance to bridge the distance that had always existed between them, to step beyond friendship, beyond curiosity, and into something far more real, far more intimate, far more fragile in its beauty. She tried to speak, to offer a greeting that wouldn't betray her racing heart, but the words caught in her throat, and Ethan, sensing her hesitation, tilted his head slightly, his expression soft, inviting her to speak without pressure, to move at her own pace. And it was in that moment she realized that he was not just someone she admired from afar, but someone who genuinely cared about the small, subtle cues of her emotions, someone who could make her feel safe even in moments of awkward vulnerability. And that realization made her chest tighten with a mixture of excitement and fear, a fluttering sensation that reminded her of all the quiet afternoons she had spent imagining what it might be like if they were alone together, if words flowed freely and hearts were honest. And now, with him sitting calmly before her, those imaginings seemed suddenly possible, tangible, and frighteningly close to reality. She sank onto a chair across from him, careful to keep a respectful distance, yet feeling as though the invisible thread connecting them was pulling tighter, drawing her in without her even realizing it, and as she settled, she noticed the room in greater detail. The soft, muted colors of the walls, the faint scent of books and something faintly floral, the way the sunlight fell through the window and painted golden patterns across the floor, all of it creating a space that felt almost sacred. A perfect backdrop for the delicate unfolding of emotions she could no longer ignore, and she wondered if Ethan felt the same way, if he too recognized the tension, the unspoken attraction, the mixture of longing and restraint that made this moment so charged, so alive, so impossibly real. He leaned back slightly, resting his arms on his knees, and began speaking in that calm, measured tone she had always admired, talking about his day, about small frustrations, about fleeting thoughts that revealed his intelligence and sensitivity, and Lila found herself hanging on every word, captivated not just by what he said, but by how he said it, by the slight rise and fall of his voice, by the pauses that hinted at thoughts deeper than words could express, and as she listened, she realized that this was more than admiration, more than a crush, it was a connection, a recognition of kindred spirits who had finally found a moment to exist together without pretense, without masks, without the need to be anything other than who they were in that instant, and it thrilled her and scared her in equal measure. The conversation flowed naturally, moving from small talk to personal reflections, and Lila found herself revealing little pieces of herself she had never shared before, thoughts and feelings she had tucked away for fear of being judged, and each time she spoke, Ethan responded with empathy and understanding, with questions that showed he truly listened, truly cared, and it made her heart swell with a warmth that was both comforting and intoxicating, a sense that here, in this room, with this person, she could be herself fully and still be seen, still be valued, still be understood in a way that transcended casual friendship, and as the minutes passed, she noticed subtle shifts in their proximity, subtle glances that lingered longer than necessary, the occasional brush of hands against notebooks or chair edges that sent a jolt of electricity through her, a silent communication of curiosity, of attraction, of something neither of them had dared to name but both felt strongly, and that silent acknowledgement made the space between them feel alive, almost humming with unspoken possibilities, and Lila's thoughts swirled with questions. Could this moment last forever? Should she say what she felt, or wait? Did he feel the same way? And before she could answer any of them, Ethan laughed softly at something she said, a warm, genuine sound that made her pulse quicken, and she realized that she had been holding her breath for the last several minutes, and now, exhaling, she felt a strange mix of relief and longing, a yearning for more moments like this, for a closeness that might be fleeting but felt monumental in its intensity. As the conversation continued, they shared small stories from childhood, little regrets and missed opportunities, and Lila found herself marveling at how easily he made her feel understood, how naturally he drew her out of her shell, how effortlessly he could make her laugh and reflect and feel simultaneously, and with each passing minute, the emotional connection between them deepened, a delicate bond forming in the quiet, golden-lit room, a bond that carried both tenderness and anticipation. And she realized that she was no longer merely observing him, she was participating in something rare, something that could not be replicated or forced, a moment suspended in time where vulnerability and attraction danced together in a fragile, beautiful balance, and she wanted desperately to preserve it, to hold on to it, to protect it from the interruptions of the outside world. But of course, the world had a way of intruding just when things felt perfect. As Lila began to gather the courage to express the feelings that had been growing inside her for months, the faint sound of movement outside the door reached her ears, a creak, a cough, a gentle step that reminded her they were not alone, and her heart jumped violently in her chest, fear and anticipation colliding, and she looked at Ethan, whose expression mirrored her own mixture of hope and alarm, and for a fleeting second, their eyes locked in a silent understanding. This moment was delicate, it was precious, it was theirs, yet it was temporary, and the outside world could intrude at any second, shattering the fragile magic. Lila's mind raced as she considered what to do next, whether to seize the chance to reveal the emotions she had kept hidden, to risk embarrassment and rejection for the possibility of connection, or to remain silent, To preserve the calm intimacy of the room while leaving her heart longing for what could be, a decision made even more complicated by the way Ethan's eyes seemed to reach for hers, filled with curiosity and something softer, something warmer, a reflection of the feelings she had been harboring secretly, and she felt her pulse quicken as a wave of courage washed over her, a determination to speak even if the words trembled, even if they faltered, because the connection between them, fragile as it was, deserved to be acknowledged, deserved to be honored, and perhaps most importantly, deserved to be felt fully, without fear. The air in the room seemed charged now, thick with possibilities, with moments waiting to be claimed, and every glance, every gesture, every pause in conversation felt loaded with meaning, a delicate dance of emotion and anticipation, a silent acknowledgement of the attraction and mutual respect that had been building quietly for months, unseen by the outside world but now undeniable, tangible, and vibrating in the space between them, and Lila realized that this was the kind of moment that could define relationships, could shift perceptions, could turn ordinary afternoons into memories that lingered for years, and she wanted, with all her heart, to preserve it, to savor it, to allow it to unfold naturally, without rushing, without forcing, without allowing fear to dominate the fragile emotional landscape they had created together, and in that awareness, she felt a sense of peace, a quiet joy, and a flutter of excitement all at once, a realization that life could surprise her in ways she had never expected, that vulnerability could be beautiful, that connection could be real, and that the small, golden-lit room she stood in was a world apart from all the expectations and judgments of the outside, a world where hearts could speak without words, where attraction could be acknowledged without embarrassment, where longing could exist without shame, and where the seeds of something extraordinary could begin to grow quietly, tenderly, with patience and care, a beginning that felt both fragile and monumental, and as Lila finally met Ethan's gaze with a mixture of shyness and courage, she knew that this afternoon was a turning point, a moment she would carry forever, and that whatever happened next, whether interrupted, delayed, or prolonged, the connection they shared had been awakened, had been recognized, had been honored, and she could feel, with a thrilling certainty, that their story was only just beginning. Twilight had settled over the house, casting a soft, violet glow across the walls, and Lila felt an urgent need to return to the guest room, her thoughts swirling with what had happened earlier, the delicate, unspoken tension with Ethan that had left her heart racing and her mind spinning with possibilities, and as she moved down the hallway, the floor creaking faintly beneath her steps, she wondered if he was thinking of her in the same way, if he too felt the pull between them that made ordinary moments feel electric, a quiet anticipation that hummed beneath the surface of everything, and when she reached the door and hesitated, her hand brushing the knob, she felt a mix of fear and exhilaration, realizing that what awaited her inside could change everything or could remain a fleeting, fragile moment that slipped through her fingers forever, but the curiosity, the longing, and the desire to understand, to connect, were stronger than any caution she could muster, and with a deep breath, she opened the door. Ethan was there, sitting on the bed, a notebook open across his knees, the soft lamplight highlighting the thoughtful expression on his face, and he looked up when he heard her, a small, tired smile forming on his lips, one that conveyed recognition, warmth, and a hint of shyness, and in that instant, Lila felt the weight of the hours she had imagined this very moment, the countless daydreams she had spun about conversations that might flow between them, the laughter, the confessions, the subtle touches, all converging into this single, fragile reality, and it was more intense than she had ever imagined, more beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. She stepped fully into the room, closing the door gently behind her, and Ethan's eyes followed her movements with quiet attention, as if he were mapping her presence, cataloging every subtle change in expression, the way her shoulders carried tension, the slight lift of her eyebrows, the way her lips curved when she smiled, and in the way he looked at her, she saw curiosity, admiration, and something more, something soft, protective, tender, and undeniably human, and her heart responded with a flutter that was impossible to ignore, a reminder that attraction was not merely physical but deeply emotional, that connection was built in the way they observed each other, the way they shared space, the way silence itself could communicate volumes if one were willing to listen. She perched on the edge of a nearby chair, feeling the invisible thread between them grow taut with every shared glance and quiet breath, and the room itself seemed to shrink until it was just the two of them, a small world where the outside noise, the interruptions, the expectations, and the judgments of daily life had no place, and the intimacy of that space, warm, fragrant, golden with light, was both comforting and thrilling, a rare moment where vulnerability was not weakness but a bridge connecting two people who had longed, secretly, for understanding and closeness. Ethan closed his notebook with deliberate care, placing it gently on the bed beside him, and then turned toward her fully, his expression open, inviting, as if to say, "We can speak freely, no need to hide, no need to pretend." And the permission in his gaze emboldened Lila, making her realize that the words she had practiced, imagined, and feared were now within reach, waiting for the courage to form on her lips, and yet, even as she considered speaking, the tension between them swelled, a delicate interplay of attraction, restraint, admiration, and hope, and she sensed that every glance, every slight movement, carried meaning beyond the literal, beyond language, beyond conscious thought, a language of emotion, a shared rhythm of hearts that were both cautious and eager, both guarded and yearning. The conversation began slowly, starting with casual topics, books they had read, music they liked, movies that had moved them, but quickly deepened into reflections on life, fleeting regrets, unspoken fears, and quiet dreams that they had never shared with anyone else, and as each sentence passed, Lila felt layers of Ethan unfold before her, revealing complexity, vulnerability, sensitivity, humor, and depth, and she found herself reciprocating, revealing pieces of herself that were usually hidden behind walls of self-consciousness or careful control, sharing thoughts that felt precious because they were authentic, true, and acknowledged in a way that few people ever acknowledged another human being. She realized that in this room, in this fragile, intimate space, they were not pretending, not performing, not constrained by expectations, but simply being, existing in the simplest, most profound form of connection, where curiosity met respect, admiration met vulnerability, and attraction met understanding, and it thrilled her, terrified her, and made her want to linger indefinitely in this suspended moment. Their hands brushed accidentally at times, on the notebook, on the edge of the bed, as if fate itself were testing them with gentle sparks of electricity, and each touch, fleeting as it was, sent a warmth through her that was impossible to ignore. A silent communication of desire and recognition, of mutual longing, and though neither spoke of it directly, both felt it, acknowledged it, and danced carefully around it, savoring the tension without breaking it, savoring the thrill of proximity and possibility while honoring the unspoken rules of patience, respect, and emotional intimacy that made the connection feel so rare, so special, so alive. Lila noticed the way his eyes softened when he listened, how he nodded gently when she spoke, how his lips curved subtly as he absorbed her words, and she felt a rush of warmth and affection that was entirely different from infatuation or simple admiration. It was deeper, rooted in respect, recognition, and the shared experience of being truly seen, and she realized she had never felt this way about anyone before, had never encountered a person whose presence could simultaneously comfort and exhilarate her, and it left her breathless with longing, anticipation, and a strange, beautiful ache of hope. The conversation moved into confessions, small, tentative admissions of mistakes, missed chances, heartbreaks, dreams deferred, moments of self-doubt and resilience, and each revelation seemed to strip away a layer of pretense, leaving them both exposed in the gentlest, safest way possible, a way that demanded trust, empathy, and openness. And in that mutual vulnerability, Lila felt the bond between them deepen, solidifying in a delicate, invisible way that was more powerful than any declaration of love could be at this moment, because it was organic, earned, and unhurried. She laughed softly at something he said, and his laugh, warm and genuine, wrapped around her like a comforting embrace, and she felt her heartbeat accelerate, a mix of attraction, joy, and longing that made her want to stay in this room forever, in this bubble of light, warmth, and unspoken intimacy, and she realized that time had ceased to exist outside this space, that the world beyond the door did not matter, that nothing else could intrude on the connection forming between them now. And then, as she gathered courage to speak words that had been forming in her mind for weeks, to hint at feelings she could no longer contain, a sudden flicker of the lights interrupted the fragile spell of the room, plunging them into brief darkness, leaving them in shadows where every movement, every heartbeat, every breath was heightened, amplified, and charged with anticipation, and Lila felt Ethan's hand brush hers instinctively, a gesture that was both comforting and electrifying. Signaling that he too was aware of the intimacy, the longing, the delicate chemistry that had been simmering beneath the surface, and in that brief, flickering moment, time seemed to stretch, pause, and hold them suspended in a quiet, tension-filled limbo where words were unnecessary and feelings spoke louder than language ever could, a perfect collision of vulnerability, attraction, and the thrill of the unknown. The light returned gradually, but the room felt different now, charged with possibility, aware of itself, as if the shadows had revealed truths that sunlight alone could not, and both Lila and Ethan understood silently that the connection had deepened irrevocably, had shifted into a space where honesty, desire, and emotional intimacy could exist safely yet intensely, and that no interruption from the outside world could undo what had begun. Lila felt an urgent need to savor every detail, the warmth of his hand, the softness in his eyes, the quiet cadence of his voice, the way the room seemed to hum around them, and as they continued to speak, exploring each other's thoughts, dreams, fears, and joys, she realized that the attraction between them was not fleeting, not superficial, but rooted in understanding, empathy, and mutual recognition, a rare bond that was as thrilling as it was tender, and she longed for the conversation to stretch endlessly, to allow them to linger in this shared, intimate space where hearts were honest, eyes were open, and the unspoken was as powerful as the spoken, a delicate, intoxicating dance of emotion, awareness, and longing that neither could resist, and yet both understood needed patience, care, and gentleness to flourish. Every glance, every sigh, every subtle gesture built upon the last, weaving a quiet, intricate tapestry of connection that was both thrilling and terrifying, a fragile miracle of emotional intimacy, and as the evening deepened, Lila felt her heart expand with the awareness that what was happening here was rare, precious, and transformative, a moment that would linger in memory long after the lights dimmed and the house fell silent, a beginning of a story that neither of them could yet fully define, but both felt with every fiber of their being, a story suspended between what had been and what might be, glowing with possibility, charged with emotion, and destined to leave an indelible mark on both their hearts, a story that was only just beginning, a story whose next chapter would be written in shared glances, whispered words, and the quiet, thrilling pulse of two souls discovering each other in ways that were as delicate as they were unforgettable, and as Lila looked into Ethan's eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand near hers, the soft cadence of his voice, the gentle rhythm of his breathing, she understood with a thrilling certainty that what had begun tonight was only the start of something profound, something tender, something real, and that the rest of their journey would be shaped by courage, honesty, and the quiet, powerful intimacy of two hearts meeting in perfect, fragile alignment. The house was quiet now, the soft glow of the evening settling into a gentle hush that made every sound seem amplified, every breath feel deliberate, and Lila found herself lingering just inside the doorway of the guest room, her hand resting lightly on the knob, hesitating as if the slightest movement could break the fragile spell that had woven itself between her and Ethan over the past hours, and she could feel the mixture of excitement and nervousness thrumming through her veins like an electric current, each heartbeat echoing in her ears, a reminder that moments like this were rare, precious, and fleeting, and yet despite the nervous energy, she felt an unexpected calm, a sense that whatever happened next, this room had become a space where honesty, vulnerability, and connection could exist without judgment or interruption, and as she stepped fully into the room, closing the door gently behind her, she noticed the faint golden light from the lamp illuminating Ethan's face in a soft, warm glow, highlighting the quiet attentiveness in his eyes, the gentle lift of his lips into a faint, reassuring smile, and the subtle shift in his posture as if he too felt the weight and importance of this delicate, unspoken moment, and in that instant, Lila understood that what they were sharing was more than mere attraction, it was recognition, empathy, and a connection that transcended ordinary conversation, a meeting of hearts that had been waiting patiently for the opportunity to be acknowledged and cherished, and she felt a shiver of both anticipation and tenderness at the thought that she was no longer merely a visitor in his world, but an active participant in a story that was unfolding in real time, fragile yet alive, tender yet thrilling, a story built on the quiet, powerful intimacy of shared presence and unspoken understanding. She moved closer, careful to respect the space that had formed between them, and Ethan's eyes followed her with a softness that made her chest tighten, a subtle invitation that carried the weight of attention, care, and awareness, and she realized with a startling clarity that every gesture, every glance, every pause between words, was charged with meaning, and that the bond they had been nurturing through conversation, laughter, shared stories, and fleeting touches had now grown into something undeniably real, something that neither distance nor distraction could diminish, and the awareness of this connection filled her with warmth, courage, and a yearning she could no longer contain, a desire to linger in this space of emotional closeness, to explore the depths of understanding and trust that had been established between them, to allow the unspoken to speak volumes without forcing words or actions, and to honor the delicacy of what they were discovering together in this small, golden-lit room. Ethan reached for the notebook he had been reading earlier, and instead of focusing on the words within, he allowed his attention to shift fully to Lila, a subtle but unmistakable gesture that made her feel seen, valued, and understood in a way that went beyond superficial attention, beyond fleeting attraction, beyond casual conversation. It was a recognition of presence, of thought, of emotion, a signal that he acknowledged not just who she appeared to be, but who she was in the quiet corners of her mind and heart, and the intensity of that acknowledgement made her cheeks warm and her breath catch in her throat, a thrilling mix of excitement and tender vulnerability, a cocktail of emotions that she could neither name fully nor suppress. She found herself speaking more freely now, opening up about small regrets, forgotten dreams, fears of being misunderstood, and moments of longing she had carried silently for years, and Ethan listened with a patience and attentiveness that was almost painful in its perfection, nodding at the right times, smiling softly at the humor or irony in her stories, leaning just slightly forward when the depth of her words demanded it, and offering the occasional empathetic question that encouraged her to continue without pressure, without judgment, without a single hint of condescension, and she realized that this was a rare gift, a connection that was simultaneously safe and thrilling, intimate and emotionally expansive, a moment where hearts could meet without the interference of ego or expectation, and the realization made her pulse quicken, a bright warmth radiating through her chest, a mixture of excitement, hope, and a gentle, fluttering fear that this fragile bubble might be disrupted by something as simple as a knock on the door or a casual interruption. But no interruption came, and they continued to talk, their words flowing seamlessly between laughter and reflection, anecdotes and confessions, teasing remarks and vulnerable admissions, a rhythm that seemed both natural and orchestrated by some quiet magic, a rhythm that made the world outside the room fade to insignificance, leaving only the glow of the lamp, the sound of their voices, the subtle rise and fall of breathing, and the electric anticipation that hummed invisibly between them, a tension of emotions that neither could fully name but both understood instinctively, a silent acknowledgement of attraction, longing, and the shared understanding that this moment was extraordinary, rare, and transformative. At one point, their hands brushed accidentally as they both reached for the same notebook, and the fleeting touch sent a spark through Lila's entire body, a warmth that spread quickly and left her breathless, her mind simultaneously thrilled and aware, conscious of the delicate boundaries that existed, yet unable to deny the intensity of the connection that had been building for hours, days, months even, unspoken and simmering beneath the surface, now revealed in subtle gestures, glances, and shared presence, a bond that had matured without fanfare or rush, but now demanded acknowledgement through every glance, every movement, every beat of their hearts that seemed to sink without intention or effort. The conversation deepened further as the evening shadows lengthened, moving into topics that were tender and revealing, dreams that had been postponed, heartbreaks that lingered, moments of loneliness and the longing for connection that they had both felt in ways no one else could fully understand. And with each revelation, Lila felt herself drawn closer, emotionally, spiritually. Even if the physical space between them remained measured and respectful, a dance of distance and proximity that allowed them to explore the emotional intimacy while preserving the safety and gentleness that had made the connection so remarkable in the first place. Ethan listened attentively, occasionally offering a soft smile, a knowing glance, a quiet word of encouragement, and each of these gestures was amplified in Lila's awareness, building a mosaic of warmth, trust, and possibility that seemed to fill the room entirely, leaving her feeling simultaneously exhilarated and profoundly comforted, aware that the moment was fleeting yet infinite, delicate yet monumental, and that the impact of their interaction would echo far beyond the boundaries of the guest room, beyond the hours of the evening, into memories and feelings that would remain long after the lights were dimmed and the house fell silent. The subtle tension of attraction and unspoken longing continued to weave itself around them, gentle but undeniable, and though neither spoke directly of their feelings, the electricity of proximity, of vulnerability, and of mutual awareness made the air between them almost palpable, charged with the thrill of emotional closeness and the quiet power of recognition, the kind of recognition that only comes when two people have been aware of each other quietly, secretly, and finally encounter each other fully, with attention, respect, and an awareness that this moment could be the start of something rare and lasting, if nurtured carefully, patiently, and sincerely. As the evening deepened and the shadows danced across the walls, Ethan reached for Lila's hand gently, lightly, almost as if testing the water, and she felt a surge of warmth, reassurance, and excitement that coursed through her, a confirmation of what had been unspoken but deeply felt, that their connection was real, tangible, and mutual, and that for the first time, she could allow herself to acknowledge the longing, the attraction, the possibility of love that had been growing quietly between them for months, a recognition that was thrilling, tender, and transformative all at once, a perfect crescendo to the delicate tension of the afternoon and evening. And in that moment, time seemed to stretch and suspend, each heartbeat amplified, each breath laden with emotion, each glance loaded with meaning, and Lila realized that this room, this evening, this quiet, intimate connection, was not just an ordinary encounter, but a turning point, a doorway into a shared story of understanding, attraction, emotional intimacy, and hope, a beginning of a journey that could carry them forward into new levels of trust, vulnerability, and companionship, a journey defined not by speed or certainty, but by presence, attentiveness, and the gentle unfolding of hearts willing to be open and honest, tender yet bold, cautious yet exhilarated, and as the night deepened, she felt a quiet certainty in her chest, a gentle, glowing hope that this was not the end, that tomorrow would bring more shared moments, more laughter, more conversation, more recognition, more tenderness, and perhaps, slowly, a love that had waited patiently, quietly, and unwaveringly for the right time to emerge, and in that understanding, Lila allowed herself to smile softly, her heart lighter, warmer, fuller, knowing that she and Ethan had discovered something rare and precious, something that could change the way they experienced life, connection, and emotion, a story that was theirs, delicate, beautiful, and just beginning.